presentation is Media Myths on Homosexuality. And the 8 primary myths that I would like to address today are the following: that 10% of the population is gay. We were born this way. The gay lifestyle is perfectly natural and healthy. There's no homosexual agenda. The homosexuals are, predominantly victims. Equal rights has to include gay marriage. Most child sexual abusers are straight, and anybody who opposes us hates us. So I've heard all of these, 1,000 times, and sometimes you really get kind of tired of hearing it. So I decided that I'd start researching these and see if they were actually true, because I've heard them so many times. And so I approach this from a statistical viewpoint. One of my doctorates is in system science, which is statistics on steroids, all the most advanced computer technology used to analyze various human trends. So let's get into this here. The first myth, that 10% of the population is homosexual. I grew up believing this because Alfred Kinsey himself, the most famous sexpert in the history of the world, most likely, said it in 1948 that 10% of males in the sample were predominantly homosexual between the ages of 16 and 55. It wasn't until I got my hands on his male and female reports that I figured out how he got to this particular number of 10%. And so it has been repeated ad nauseum for the past 40 or so years. Homosexuality is 1 in 10. It's 1 in 10 on the football team, the baseball team, the softball team. It's 1 in 10 on the basketball team. Those are facts. Or even a number of organizations that are named something like this, the 1 in 10 Club, the 10% Foundation, and so on. The reality on orientation, though, if you look at the 22 major studies that have focused on more than 250,000 people, that the number of people who've ever had a homosexual experience in their entire lives turns out to be 1 in 30, 1 in 35. Men 3.1%, women 3.3%. And significantly, about half of these only have a homosexual experience once. So the number of people who call themselves exclusively homosexual is 1.6% for men and 1.7% for women. So this is the total, taken from 22 different studies in 6 different countries of more than 250,000 people. So this is the reality of what we're talking about here, not 1 in 10, but about 1 in 60. Now, the Associated Press recently did a survey of several thousand Americans and asked them, how many people do you think are gay? And the result came back approximately 25%. The propaganda campaign has worked so well that the average American thinks that 1 out of every 4 people is a homosexual. So the story behind the myth, Bruce Voller in his book, Some Uses and Abuses of the Kinsey Scale, said that after years of our educating those who inform the public and make its laws, the concept that 10% of the population is gay has become a generally accepted fact. While some reminding always seem necessary, the 10% figure is regularly utilized by scholars, by the press, and government statistics. As in so many pieces of knowledge and myth, repeated telling made it so. So this began with the Mail report of Alfred Kinsey in 1948. I have several copies on my shelves, but they're kind of hard to come by these days. But the reality is about 1 out of 6, 1.6 or 1.7%. So that myth is busted. The second one is that we were born this way. Alfred Kinsey, once again, originated this particular myth, and he said there's little evidence of the existence of such a thing as innate perversity. I have myself come to the conclusion that homosexuality is largely a matter of conditioning. He said this back in 1972 before the propaganda campaigns began. So he changed his mind in the intervening years between 1948 and 1972. The other 2 most famous sex experts are Masters and Johnson, who said the genetic theory of homosexuality has been generally discarded today. Despite the interest in possible hormone mechanisms and origins, no serious scientists suggest a simple cause-effect relationship applies. We are born man, woman, and sexual beings. We learn our sexual preferences and orientations. But the most reliable people to ask are the gay people themselves. And this Kinsey Institute, based in Indiana, did a survey of thousands of people back in 1973, and here's what the gay people themselves said. I had homosexual experiences as a child, about 1 out of 5. I am gay because I have a lot of homosexual friends, about 1 out of 6. A poor relationship with my father and my mother, about 1 out of 3, if you combine them. Unusual development, about 1 out of 6. Heterosexual partners were unavailable, 12%. Social ineptitude. I was born that way. Only 1 out of 11 said this back in 1973. This was before the propaganda campaigns began, and where you pretty much have to say that I was born that way if it can be accepted as a real gay person. But this argument is just a distraction. What does it matter if we were born that way or not? We're all born with all kinds of weaknesses, one kind or another. You know about that, right? I mean, take my own example. My mother and my father were both alcoholics, falling down alcoholics. And we know that now that alcoholism is genetic, which means I myself am also an alcoholic. So what do? Do I just go out and get drunk every night and stagger home, collapse on the front porch and puke on my wife's shoes and say, you can't blame me, I was born this way? No, I don't do that. You just stay away from alcohol. Sometimes it can be a really powerful temptation to just steel yourself and stay away from it. It's better not to be a fallen down drunk than it is to be, an abstaining alcoholic. Weakness is not an excuse to just give in because we all suffer from it. It causes all kinds of problems, no matter whether it's violence or racism or tendency to steal or alcoholism and the rest of it. Nobody can justify these things by making the excuse that we were born this way. We all have free will and a choice to either surrender to our weaknesses like cowardly weakness, to overcome our fault for our own good and for the good of everybody else. What are you doing under there? Gosh. Loud enough for me. One of the strange things I don't really understand is gender subversion. Back in the 1960s was the first time the word gender was used. Now, sex is what we're born as, male or female. It cannot be manipulated or changed. I don't know how many surgeries you want to go through, but a male cannot become a female or vice versa. Genetically, if you look at the chromosomes and then you see what that person has, it doesn't matter what they look like, they're either male or female. But gender is a word with no fixed meaning. What we think we are or want to be, and we can change it to the wind. Several times a day if you want, you can be male or female. You can switch back and forth. It is a classic tool of subversion and confusion. And this kind of agenda, the homophile agenda, only can advance in an atmosphere of confusion and clarity, lack of clarity. So what we're trying to do here is get down to the bottom of this and find out what is actually the truth. According to the United Nations World Health Organization, gender is the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. But we're going beyond that now. The post-genderism movement, which is becoming more and more outspoken, a diverse social, political, and cultural movement whose adherents affirm that voluntary elimination of gender in the human species through the application of advanced biotechnology and assisted reproductive technologies. So everybody would be the same gender. I don't know what these people are smoking, but I hope I have access to it when I'm on my deathbed with a lot of pain, because it doesn't seem to me like this makes a whole lot of sense. Andrew Sullivan said, what if parents committed to gender equity counteracted the effect of testosterone on boys in the womb by complementing it with injections of artificial female hormones? Structural gender differences could be eradicated from the beginning. Such a policy would lead to men and women with normal bodies but identical feminine brains. War, rape, boxing, car racing, pornography, and hamburgers and beer would soon be distant memories, and a feminist paradise would have arrived. Does this make any sense to anybody, where everybody has female brains with different kinds of bodies? And this is the kind of thinking we see that's going to be talked about more and more and more as time goes on. It seems stupid now, but 20 years from now it might not be. Here's another dumb argument. If you're against gay rights, you must be gay yourself. I've heard this over and over again. We have this Waging Peace poster that says, there was a time years ago when people could hide their own homosexual tendencies by loudly attacking other gays in public. But not anymore. These days when you harass gay people, it just puts a spotlight of suspicion on you. So So maybe you better mind your own business unless you want others to think that homosexuality is your business. So this is a classic tactic to try to shut opponents up. It's one of the several head games they play to make you just want to sit back and say, oh my gosh, I don't want to be thought I'm gay myself. But this is just as dumb as saying that people who are against capital punishment really long to be executioners. They want to do that injection. They want to, flip that lever so the person gets hung. They want to shoot these people. Anti-war activists yearn to go to war and slaughter the enemy. Environmentalists want to drive huge SUVs and pollute the environment. Feminists secretly want to oppress women, and those who fight child sexual abuse secretly want to beat up and abuse children. It doesn't make any more sense than that. So think about it when somebody next accuses you, well, you must be gay yourself because you're speaking out against homosexuality. The third myth is a perfectly healthy and acceptable lifestyle. So we have Mary Hunt here, the lesbian feminist activist who considers herself to be a Catholic priest. And she says, once again, churches lag behind science. Long after social and behavioral scientists have proven that homosexuality is healthy, good, and natural for a certain percentage of our population, the Roman Catholic Church continues to teach antiquated and harmful theology. So let's take a look at, is homosexuality perverse, which is defined as an aberrant sexual practice, especially an habitual and preferred to normal coitus. Well, if you look at the definition of this and the social aspects of homosexuality, we cannot say that homosexuality is perverse, because a lot of the things that homosexuals do, straight people do too. Is it unnatural? Not being in accordance with nature or consistent with the normal course of events? Well, we can't say that either, because apparently thousands of different species of animals also engage in homosexual activity. So homosexuality is not unnatural. How about abnormal, deviating from the normal or average? Well, with all the crazy garbage that's going on in the world today, almost nothing is abnormal anymore. So we can't say that homosexuality is abnormal. How about unbiblical? Well, I guess the homosexuals got tired of having their lifestyle criticized by Bible-believing Catholics and Protestants, so they wrote their own Bible, gay-bible.org, if you want to look for yourself. It's called the Queen James Version. So we can't say that homosexuality is perverse, unnatural, abnormal, or unbiblical. Now, I don't like squishy terms like this, but you can prove that homosexuality is a public health disaster. Heavy drinkers lose an average of 5 years from their lives, according to the American Medical Association. Heavy smokers lose about 7 years from their lives. Illegal drug addicts, an average of 10 years from their lives. And very overweight people, 100 pounds or more, lose an average of 12 years from their lives. But life expectancies of gay people, 25-year loss, both male and female homosexuals. This is not due to AIDS, by the way. It's due to an incredibly high murder and suicide rate, very high accident rate, lots of different cancers and heart diseases at a much higher rate than the straight population. Now, I did this analysis off of many, many obituaries from a bunch of different homosexual magazines and other publications. All it really is just adding things up and dividing. 25 years lost off of your life from a very large sample size. So when I go to Africa and I'm talking to the people over there who might be considering this sort of thing, getting into the gay lifestyle, which is very rare in some countries, I say if you're a college student and you're the age of 21, your life is about half over already. So consider the consequences before you get into something like this. You've all seen the Batman movies, I'm sure, this meme on the internet. You tell a smoker smoking's unhealthy and nobody bats an eye. You tell a homosexual he's going to die early, his lifestyle is unhealthy, and everyone loses their minds. So it's a very politically incorrect thing to say, but it's scientifically provable. And all of the information is on this little DVD here, which is available for distribution. Then we hear the argument that a lot of animals engage in homosexual behavior, therefore it must be okay for people. Here's Toronto Zoo's Pedro and Buddy, the most famous homosexual animals probably in the world. What they fail to tell you, and they'll always leave out a critical piece of information, is that Pedro and Buddy were inseparable until the very first day they introduced two female penguins. Within an hour, they abandoned each other and they paired up with the female penguins. The dumbest argument ever is we see homosexual behavior among animals, so it must be natural. Well, animals also practice murder, infanticide, child abuse and neglect, cannibalism, incest, rape and polygamy, and public nudity. So does that mean that people ought to be able to do these things too? It's not a very good argument at all. Yet I see these really flowery scientific papers listing all these species of animal that has homosexual activity. They don't mention all of this kind of stuff too. So it is a rather dumb argument. We're people, not animals. There is a theory that I've been researching lately that occurred to a number of people that homosexuality actually is an addiction. Now, I'm just throwing this out as a theory. I don't believe this yet, or I don't disbelieve it. I'm doing further research, but if you look at the American Medical Association definition of addiction, you'll find that a person who enters a homosexual lifestyle immediately reorients their priorities. They become obsessive and extremely defensive about the lifestyle. They become compulsive about it and cannot control themselves. It's like a drug addiction. They become reclusive and draw away from their former friends. You see dramatic personality changes, withdrawal from society in general, and only associating with other people of their own kind, escapism, obsession with privacy, and cross addictions. So it'll probably take another year or two to really research this in depth. This is a theory right now. And there are a lot of quotes that can back this up. More than 30 years ago, a radio spokesperson said in 1981 we drew back and became more sexually conservative because of fear of the AIDS epidemic. Now we've decided that certain death is preferable to dull sex lives. So this is definitely an addictive type of statement, and it's a very interesting theory that we'll be looking into over the next couple of years. The fourth myth, all we want is to live our lives in peace. There's no such thing as a gay agenda. So we hear, I want to go to my job, I want to have a home, I want to save my money, and I want to go on vacation. What kind of hidden agenda are they talking about? Or the gay agenda, spend time with my family, be treated equally, and buy milk. So what's the truth about this? What's legitimate equality? According to the homosexual group Human Rights Campaign Fund, fairness, that's all we're asking for. Protection from unfair discrimination in jobs and housing. An end to anti-gay violence. Immigration reform. Defeat of bigoted laws denying human dignity and equal justice to lesbians and gay men. Heck, I can get on board with that. I think that's perfectly fair. That's perfectly right. Everybody deserves basic human rights. The great majority of homosexuals, 98 or 99%, will be perfectly satisfied with this. But it's not the majority who set the true gay agenda. This is something from the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Offensive special rights, an offensive term. Preferred equal rights or equal protection. Anti-gay extremists frequently characterize civil rights and equal protection of the law for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans as special rights in an attempt to energize opposition to anti-discrimination and equal opportunity laws. Well, this isn't right, you know. There may be a small crowd of people like the Westboro Baptist Church and others who do want to deny gays and lesbians equal protection of the law, but 99% of pro-family people don't want to do that. So what is a special right? What are we talking about? A special right is a right demanded by a group of people who want to deny the same right to others, especially their ideological opponents. That's what a special right is. In other words, I have this particular right, but my opponents do not have that same right, especially. So some of the special rights that I've documented over the years, we demand that all television and radio broadcasting and internet material critical of homosexuality be banned. And all of this is documented on this little handout that you can pick up on that table back there. We demand our religious view on the morality and acceptability of homosexuality be imposed on everyone. We hear a lot about we can't have the fundamentalist and Catholic view that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered, forced on everybody. But what these guys are trying to do is force the Unitarian idea that homosexuality is perfectly acceptable on the entire country. So they also have a religious view that they're trying to force on the rest of us. We demand the right to be Catholic priests. In 6 different countries, homosexuals have sued their local bishops and rectors for dismissing them from the seminary because they were homosexuals, but they were preying on other seminarians. So they are claimed to be the only group of people who have the right to be Catholic priests. We demand that all speakers be banned from talking about men marrying women. We had a homosexual group in Italy recently make this demand. We see this guy here dressed up like a bishop, flicking the finger off to people going into church. We see, disrespectful posters like this, homophobes are full of shit. We see the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence mocking, priests and nuns. One of the demands they make is we demand the right to ridicule others, and we demand that anyone ridiculing us be charged with a hate crime. So you can see how this shakes out. These special rights are ones that have been demanded by certain homosexual groups. We demand that all who oppose gay marriage be forbidden to run for public office, be banned from working for government in any capacity, and be barred from attending law school or from practicing law. This is the actual gist of a law that the San Antonio, Texas City Council is trying to push right now. And so far, it looks like the vote is going to be 7-2 in favor of it. That if you oppose gay marriage, you may not work for the government, and we will ban you from going to law school, at least within the city limits of San Antonio. We demand that all who oppose gay marriage be fired from their jobs without recourse. I've documented more than 30 cases where this has happened, and not once have the homosexuals said, well, this is unfair. You had a guy working for a telephone company who wrote a letter to the editor on his own time, detailing why he thought homosexual marriage was a bad idea. He got fired on demand of local homosexual groups. We demand that all opponents of gay marriage be imprisoned until they recant, and then be forced to work for homosexual groups. These are part of the law that is being pushed by the Green Party in Italy over the last 2 years. So we want all members of pro-family groups to be sent to prison for at least 6 years. I think that's a specification. And then when they get out, they have to do their community service by working with homosexual groups. It gets even more extreme. A small minority of homosexuals, certainly not the majority, demand that anyone speaking out publicly against homosexuality be charged with crimes against humanity and be sentenced to death or life in prison. Now, one case was Scott Lively when he went to Uganda to give a tour on why homosexuality is a bad idea and why homosexual marriage is not compatible with African culture. Well, what happened is after he left, the guy who was the head of one of the homosexual organizations over there, SMUG, Sexual Minorities Uganda, his name was Kana, was murdered. And so the Human Rights Campaign and a couple of other major homophile groups got together and charged him with crimes against humanity in a federal court, New York District Court. Now, what they didn't tell you, what they left out as usual, was that Kana was killed by another homosexual guy because he refused to pay him for sex. It was a male prostitute. And what they don't tell you also, that if you're found guilty of crimes against humanity, it's one of the few laws that can carry the death penalty, or at a minimum, life in prison. So here's this guy, this pastor, who goes to Africa and warns Ugandans that homosexuality is not a good idea, and he's up for life imprisonment at least. We demand the right to give blood regardless of how many other lives may be endangered. Now, up in Canada a few years ago, okay, if anybody here read about the Crever report in Canada, the tainted blood disaster, where more than 20,000 people were infected with AIDS because homosexuals back in the mid-1980s all gave blood en masse when they didn't have reliable tests against AIDS. More than 11,000 people died. And so the Ontario Superior Court of Justice upheld a ban on homosexuals giving blood because over 11,000 people died because of it. But they're still saying that this discriminates against homosexuals, and so we should have the right to give blood whether we're HIV positive or not. Which means they really don't give a damn how many people die, just so they're not offended. They can give blood. We demand the death penalty for anyone who harasses a gay person. Remember Mary Stakewitz? She was, a few years ago, let me get the details here, I can never remember this. On November 13, 2002 in Chicago, Mary Stakowitz confronted homosexual Nicholas Gutierrez and asked him, "Why do you sleep with boys?" You know, she was really harassing this guy. Okay, she was not giving him a really hard time for being a homosexual. So he raped and sodomized her, stabbed her so many times he broke his hunting knife, and stuffed her body in a crawl space, and finally confessed 2 days later. No homosexual group condemned the killing of Mary Stakowitz, a 51-year-old mother of 7 children and a grandmother as well. In fact, most of the comments that came in from the homosexual groups and homosexuals said things like, "The bitch had it coming to her, I'm glad he killed her. The woman who did such great evil is dead, but unfortunately the evil in the church and the society which creates it is not. Maybe her murder will strike fear in the hearts of a few fundamentalists. Where do I send a check for his defense fund? I don't feel sorry for her, too bad for her. If anyone in this case is being persecuted, it was Mr. Gutierrez. Unfortunately for the victim, this is a lesson she learned too hard and too late. Maybe this will give pause to other people." And most of the comments that came in on this murder said that she deserved what she got. Essentially, these people are saying you deserve the death penalty for harassing a homosexual. But this is a special right because nobody would demand death penalty of a homosexual for harassing a straight person. See how this works? So pick up this little pamphlet here on your way out. It's all documented on these special rights being demanded by homosexuals. For example, I would say that demanding to be nude in public all the time is not a special right because they don't care if everybody else gets naked too. So that's not a special right, but the homosexual pride parades are. The gay pride parades are because everybody supports a gay pride parade. But several times people have tried to put a special right having a gay rights parade. The fifth one is gays are targets of violence. There is an epidemic of gay bashing. This is a particular interest of me because I got accused twice of committing a hate crime because I wore a t-shirt saying yes on a particular ballot measure. So this has become rather a personal issue for me. We are a gentle, angry people. We're a justice-seeking people. We're young and old together. We're a land of many colors. We're a gay and straight together. We're a gentle, loving people, and we're singing for our lives. The amount of propaganda out there that depicts homosexuals as victims is almost overwhelming. It's everywhere. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be portrayed as victims in need of protection so that straights will be inclined by reflex to adopt the role of protector. Gays should be portrayed as victims of prejudice. In the 1986 book by Kirk and Madsen, After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 1990s. These guys laid out everything. General Patton said, "I sure hope that my opponents will write a book." And all lawyers love it when their opponents write a book because then they can figure out what the strategies are. And they have followed this particular strategy very closely indeed. Gays as victims, the government has blood on its hands, one AIDS death every half hour. This was back in the 1990s. These posters were plastered everywhere. It's the government's fault that we're dying, not our own behavior. Adolf Hitler, madman, murderer, homophobe. The other Holocaust, when Hitler seized power in 1933, he immediately launched a campaign to persecute gay people. And it talks about him sending thousands to Nazi concentration camps, where in one camp, SS guards forced gay prisoners to construct an earthwork firing range and use them as living targets. Today, gays are still targets for bigotry by attackers who feel no shame. So they're comparing anybody who opposes them to Nazis. Here we have the perfect victim, Azalea Cooley. She's African American, she's female, she's lesbian, and she's confined to a wheelchair. She was very big in the 1986 ballot measure campaign, trying to roll back special rights for homosexuals in Oregon. That was back in 1986. And she'd carry around this big poster board of all the hate crimes that had been committed against her because she was black or lesbian or female or crippled. Well, this kind of bothered the Portland Police Department, so they set up surveillance 24 hours a day around her house. And one night they caught her walking out of the house and spray painting slogans on her own house. She wasn't crippled after all. Of course, she escaped prosecution and became a big hero to the homosexual rights movement. This guy here, Laird Wilcox of the Hoaxer Project, has documented hundreds of fake hate crimes by homosexuals and others. So often we find, especially at colleges, when a hate crime actually happens, everybody rallies around the poor victims, and in the end it turns out to be a hoax in the final analysis. And of course, this is in the school newspaper here today. Judge not, lest ye be judged, Matthew 7:1. Bible experts only know that one verse. We see all the time, Roman Catholic priests and evangelicals being stereotyped like this, when in reality about the only people who do it are the Westboro Baptist Church. So here are the homosexuals who don't want to be stereotyped themselves, stereotyping other people. And that's okay. Now let's look at the Department of Justice FBI statistics on hate crime. Don't believe it when you see the numbers like there are 30,000 hate crimes a year, there are 100,000 hate crimes a year against gays. Okay, it just doesn't wash, because like I said, even wearing a t-shirt with something they don't like is classified as a hate crime. Only 1 in 77 homosexual people is ever the victim of a hate crime, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If a homosexual person had an infinite lifespan, they'd have to live 4,158 years before they are a victim of a hate crime on the average. Most violence against homosexuals, says the FBI, is committed by other homosexuals. And if you look at that spreadsheet I made on the lifespan of homosexuals, most of the murders were done by other homosexuals. Homosexuals are slightly more likely to commit violence against straights than the other way around. This was really surprising to me. But if you look at Table 1 in the hate bias crime motivated by the FBI, compiled by the FBI, you can find it right on their websites. They have a very simple table there that shows all of this here. It turns out that Matthew Shepard probably was not the victim of a hate crime either, if you believe this new book that's being put out. Homophile myth number 6, equal rights have to include gay marriage. The Marxist roots of the gay rights movement, Friedrich Engels, who really wasn't a very good husband, said that the modern family contains in germ not only slavery but serfdom. A married woman differs from the ordinary prostitute in that she does not let her body out in piecework as a wage worker, but sells it once and for all into slavery. The modern individual family is founded on the open or concealed domestic slavery of the wife. And the homophile movement has picked up this kind of language. The Gay Liberation Front manifesto from London says the oppression of gay people starts in the most basic unit of society, the family. The man in charge, a slave as his wife, their children on whom they force themselves as the ideal models. The very form of the family works against homosexuality. The long-term goal of our London Gay Liberation Front is to rid society of the gender role system which is at the root of our oppression. This can only be achieved by the abolition of the family as a unit in which children are brought up. Instead of a marriage, says Tina Rosenberg, we want a cohabitation law that ignores gender and allows more than 2 people in a partnership. Why not gay marriage? Marriage is just fine. It's commitment to it that's weak. It's not like marriage is some kind of corrupt organization. It's not. It's just that people don't know how to deal with it. Homosexual marriage is against common sense and nature always strikes back. Homosexual marriage opens the field to all kinds of screwy ideas, polygamy, zoophilia, and so on. In fact, there are a number of lawsuits now working their ways through the federal court system to legalize polygamy. After all, if 2 men can get married together, why not 2 men and a couple of women, 3 men and 1 woman, and so on? There's really absolutely no reason why not. I'm just waiting to see what happens when the Supreme Court faces one of these. If there's a conflict between the district courts. And I'm really interested to see how they're going to handle polygamy. It should be a lot of fun to watch those justices squirm. Homosexuals already have the same right to marry as anyone else. They just should marry somebody of the opposite sex, and tens of thousands of them have. I know some of them. They might still have same-sex attraction. They might not. They might have completely left that kind of life, but they're happily married, and they find out they're a lot happier than they were practicing the gay lifestyle. Why not gay marriage? We have a National Organization for Women pushing polygamy now. Polygamy is a pretty good idea for professional women who can proceed with their careers and have someone at home they can trust to watch their children. It solves a daycare problem. If now is about anything, it's about choice. But of course, you see this little cartoon here, why you rarely see a female polygamist. You mean none of you took out the trash? Why not gay marriage? Here we have a guy who's using exactly the same arguments as the homosexual rights movement. Zoophiles are born with a true love for animals and have a lifelong commitment to their care. Myself and my dog Lady live together as a married couple. In the eyes of God, we're truly married. If Maine passes an anti-bestiality law, it will be a disservice to zoo couples and will keep zoo couples from coming out of the closet and drive us deeper underground. This helps no one and would force me out of state. Well, at least the guy can't be insulted if somebody calls his wife a bitch. Then we get to the idea that homosexual marriage is beneficial for children. I've looked at about a dozen different studies, half of them saying that it is beneficial, half of them not. And the ones that say it is beneficial tend to be fatally flawed. Extremely small sample size, volunteer bias, and a lot of other things. So I compiled a complete list of studies showing that homosexual marriage is beneficial for children. And there it is. Don't believe the hype. The 7th out of 8 myths that most child sexual abusers are straight. This is the hottest topic of all. And I especially got into this when I traveled to the Vatican and talked to some very high officials there about this priestly pedophile crisis. It turned out not to be a priestly pedophile crisis at all, but a homosexual ephebophilia crisis. Those sexual abusers of children are straight. True. This is question 6 of a sexuality stereotypes quiz on Planned Parenthood Federation of America's TeenWire website. Definition, we can get things sorted out here. Pederasty is sexually molesting a young person of the same sex. Pedophilia is sexually molesting a child of the opposite sex. Ephebophilia is sexual attraction to pubescent or post-pubescent children, usually in the 10 to 16 year age range. A paraphilia, disordered sexual desire. And pedosexual is a term we see more often used by pedophiles and those who support them. Back in the 1990s and the 1980s, when the newspapers, homosexual newspapers, were a lot more honest, they said, one of these said, that the love between men and boys is at the foundation of homosexuality. For the gay community to imply that boy love is not homosexual love is ridiculous. David Thorstad, who oddly enough I know very well, he said, if it weren't for us pedophiles, there wouldn't be a gay movement. If the leaders of the gay movement today want to turn their backs on the spirit of gay liberation, well, F them. We're speaking the truth, and the truth is that man-boy love is a central part of gay liberation. It's a central feature of homosexuality in the West. Also on this DVD is a compilation of about 50 other quotes by leading homosexual people from the 70s and 80s along this line. Alfred Kinsey found that 37% of all male homosexuals admitted to having sex with kids under 17 years old. The Archives of Sexual Behavior says the rate of homosexual attraction is 6 to 20 times higher among pedophiles. 229 convicted child molesters were studied and found that 86% of them described themselves as homosexual or bisexual. A study by Alan Bell and Martin Weinberg found that 1/4 of white homosexual men had had sex with boys 16 years and younger. I have a copy of this book. Jay and Young revealed in their 1979 gay report that nearly 1 out of 4 of all male homosexuals have acted as chicken hawks. They preyed on adolescent or younger boys. So here's what the studies say. It's not a myth to say that homosexuals are a danger to children. And I hate to say that because it sounds awful bigoted. I really feel uncomfortable saying that, but it happens to be true. We have, of course, a North American Man-Boy Love Association bulletin. Strangely, a lot of those priests who were trapped and who admitted to having sex with young boys were also members of Man-Love. The 8th myth is anyone who opposes us or even disagrees with us is a homophobe. Here's Judy and Dennis Shepard, whose son was brutally murdered in Wyoming in 2001. Anybody who believes that the hatred behind the marriage amendment is any different than the hatred that was the cause of our son's murder is fooling themselves and doesn't understand what's happening every day in our society. So if you oppose homosexual marriage, then you're thinking the same way as the brutes who slaughtered our son. Homophobia is a nonsense word. Its only purpose is intimidation. It has no value and doesn't contribute in any meaningful way to a debate. It's used reflexively by supporters of homosexuality in all situations, even against people who have honest questions. They desperately fear debate, and they know their views are indefensible. When I left the government service, 2 days before I left, we happened to be scheduled for a sensitivity course, a mandatory sensitivity course, where 2 lesbians came in and talked on endlessly for several hours about how they've been victimized and how everybody should support them and so on. That's another special right, by the way. You should only have Catholics come in and say, you know, here's how you should be more sensitive to Catholics. You only have homosexuals come in and say, here's how you should support us. Anyway, I just stood up at the end and had an honest question I didn't know about. And they called me a homophobe. Said, sit down, you know, you're a hater. We don't want to hear from you. And I just wanted to ask an honest question. And oddly enough, that's what got me into this movement, because I had to research the darn question myself. And I started figuring out, hey man, all this stuff is wrong. So they hadn't told me to shut the hell up and sit down and call me this word, I wouldn't be here today. So I thank those 2 lesbians whose names I have long forgotten for getting me into this movement. Homophobia literally means a fear of sameness. So it really doesn't make any sense. So we see all kinds of silly posters out there. Erase the hate. Homophobia is insecurity about being heterosexual. Remember, the posters say that if you're against gay marriage, then you must be homosexual yourself. We get International Day Against Homophobia, Smash Homophobia, Got Homophobia, Jesus Died for Your Homophobia, High School is Against Homophobia. You just hear it so many times it kind of makes your brain numb. Homophobia kills. Closets are for clothes. Lend your voice to the outrage. Hate speech kills. You see this here? It's a matter of pride. But once again, we see a special right here because the homosexuals are constantly using violent language against us. Robert Schwab said a couple of years ago, if AIDS research money is not forthcoming at the level we want, all gay males should give blood. Whatever action is required to get national attention is valid. If that includes blood terrorism, so be it. Who cares if thousands of people die? I'd like to see an AIDS terrorist army like the Irgun, which led to the State of Israel. If someone took out and killed Jesse Helms or William Dannemeyer of California, I'd be the first to stand up and applaud. One of the founding members of ACT UP, or the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Here we go with the usqueers.com website, which is since defunct. Wanted to experience a horrible death by any means, well-known heterosexual supremacists to serve it as their reward. Back during the ballot measure 9 campaign in Oregon, we had these posters plastered all over the city, even on people's cars. Vote no on 9 or we shoot the fish. We're not asking you, we're telling you. You burn us, we burn you. No on 9. Queer knives, guns, bullets, missiles, tanks, trenches, fire, warfare, and patriots. No on 9 is a good idea. A lot of people got death threats over the phone. Here we have Lon Mabon, who is a leader of the ballot measure 9 campaign, with this huge revolver being held up against his head. The clipboard says, name, Lon Mabon, crime, hate, verdict, guilty, sentence, death, by ACT UP. So we see a lot of violent rhetoric on the opposition side, and yet they tell us that we have to be tolerant and not judgmental. Homophobes of the world unite. You see a white power guy there, Margaret Thatcher, the original Bush. I guess that's supposed to be, who the heck is that? The guy on the right, some Rasta guy. I guess the Jamaicans don't like homosexuality very much. Cure homophobia. Some people think of it as a disease. The equations, all opposition is hatred. We hear this not from the 98% of homosexuals who just want to be left alone, okay? I got no problem with those folks. It's a very highly funded and organized homophile groups like GLAAD, like Amnesty International, PFLAG, and all these other people. Hate speech is violence, therefore opposition is violence. See how this works? These are their equations. They honestly believe that any kind of opposition to that means that we hate them. We don't hate them. We don't hate them. We're trying to think of other people, not purely ourselves. Hate speech leads to violence, therefore opposition is violence. And that's the last myth that's busted right there. Okay, I shortened this up quite a bit and finished right on time again. I'm real proud of myself here because I thought especially we should have at least 45 minutes to talk back and forth about that.